From covering a murder that ignited a national debate to reporting from China during the early days of COVID, today's guest has seen journalism at its most intense and most human. All right, on today's episode, we are joined by Julie Wernau, most recently a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. All right, so we're going to get right into it. You covered health and medicine at the Wall Street Journal. One of your most recent series of stories was covering the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. Tell me, what was it like to cover a story with so much national attention? And what was the most eye-opening experience about that?
It was really surprising the amount of outrage that came out about health insurance. I think, as an American, everybody sort of has their anger about health insurance. But I mean, here we have a person who has been murdered in the middle of Manhattan, and people were online celebrating it. And it was really an opportunity for us to dig into that. What is going on with health insurance? Why are people so angry? Is there some kind of change that could come out of this? Because that is a very unusual reaction to someone just being murdered in cold blood.
Now, typically in newsrooms, there are beat reporters, right? So you're health and medicine, there's a crime reporter. How were you assigned to cover these stories?
That's a great question. Weirdly, I was actually at a health appointment when this happened. I got a phone call from my boss just as I was coming out of the exam room. And they said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm, at XYZ hospital." And they said, "Okay, can you go run out the door to the murder of this executive? And we'll send you all the, B matter we have on it and what's going on while you're on your way." And so I really ran there from where I was. I asked my boss to show up with a pencil because it was so cold out. One of the things I know from my early days when I actually was a crime reporter full time is that if you don't have a pencil with you in the cold, you will miss the story. Your pen will freeze and you won't know what's going on. And so, my boss at the Wall Street Journal showed up with a backpack and a notebook and a pencil for me. And I went around interrogating everyone in sight, essentially.
And, it sounds like almost like a scene out of a movie, but really that is the life of a journalist, right? You could be doing anything, you could be anywhere, and news breaks and you get that call. And you really have to almost literally drop everything if you want to be the reporter assigned to what you know will be a big story.
Yeah, I mean, even internally, right, there is a lot of competition for a big news story like this. I mean, this was huge news, right? It was all anyone was talking about. And so the health team wanted the story. And so in order for the health team to be the ones who get to be involved in whatever the fallout of this whole thing is going to be, call up whoever is on your team and available, and you say you are running out to the scene of that murder. And so that is what happened to me.
What would you say? You've been a journalist for quite some time. What would you say is probably your most memorable story that you've covered? And tell me how long you've been a journalist.
I have been a journalist for 22 years. And I have covered all kinds of stories. A lot of people, they sort of stay in one lane for maybe their whole career. I have not. I have been a cop reporter, crime reporter. I have been a government reporter, covered corporations. I've covered financial markets. I've been a foreign correspondent. And then I covered health and medicine. It is very difficult to say what the most memorable story is, but I would say that in recent years, definitely the story of Rob Dart. Rob Dart was a successful lawyer in California who had a psychotic episode when he was in his 30s, was on medication, doing fine as a father and a lawyer for a long time. And in the pandemic, he stopped taking his medication, fell into a delusional state and lost everything. And he was homeless. Decided to report that story while he was actively homeless and his family was desperate to help him, and ended up on this incredible emotional journey with this family and with this man. We ended up running a huge story about just all the things that the family had done to try to get this man help and how nothing worked. And then I flew out to Los Angeles and met with Rob Dart while he was still homeless, and we had lunch and we talked through it. And I wrote another story about that. And then those stories brought on just a incredible response. I had thousands of people reach out to me. I mean, probably 1 million people have read those stories. I've never had that kind of reaction to something. And through those stories, Rob Dart got help. And he ended up back home with his mother um, on medication. He's doing really well. We talk all the time. I've sort of become a little bit of a part of this family through that story, which is not something that journalists are accustomed to being comfortable with. But to me, we sort of went through it together. And that taught me so much about all the problems with the system of care in this country for people going through mental health crises.
Wow, I mean, that's a lot to unpack, Julie, but, I mean, essentially, that story right there paints the picture of what it is to be a journalist, right? You have your own personal life, you're dropping things to be part of a big story. You get to meet people and connect with people that you otherwise may not have met, and not only are you connecting with them, but you're actually getting to know them and stepping into their lives, and I think it's when you start to see that change that can happen because of your reporting, or maybe you make that deep connection with somebody who, is part of that story. I think that's really the reward of being a journalist. I don't know if you would agree with that, but there's those wins in between, the sacrifices that you make as a journalist.
Yeah, I would agree that, early in my career, when I was maybe 22 years old, there was an editor I really admired. And she said, one of the most important things you need to be a journalist is compassion. And once you lose your compassion, you need to not be a journalist anymore. And I would agree with that. I think you really you can't have a firewall between you and the people that you're interviewing. It doesn't matter if it's a executive or a person who's homeless on the street. You won't get from them what is really needed to tell the story if that's how you go into an interview. And so you give a lot of yourself in order to tell the story that needs to be told.
Yeah, such great advice, and really that is what sets a good journalist apart from just the others. How did you start as a journalist, and did you want to become a writer, a newspaper journalist?
I always wanted to be a writer, but I thought I was going to be a poet. I had never thought about being a journalist. And in college, I was one of those people reading poetry in like smoky coffee shops and stuff like that. And I thought I was going to go get an MFA. And I had a professor of critical writing who I really admired. And he took me aside one day and he said, Julie, I've heard you're quite into poetry. I said, that's right. And he said, I've read some of your poems. You're a very good critical writer. And that sort of hurt a lot to hear, but it made me kind of reconsider my career. And when I got out of college, there was a woman at the local paper that covered just my hometown who was going on maternity leave, and they were looking for someone to fill in. And I applied for this temporary position, and she ended up not coming back from maternity leave, and I found my calling. Like, I was never one of those people who had, I didn't have like a crowd I hung with in high school. I was like a little bit of everything, I was a jock, but also a theater nerd. And I never found a place for people like that until I was in journalism. It was like, you don't have to choose one way. You can learn a different thing every day. And also, by the way, you get to talk to anybody you want. Anybody you want. You get to be in rooms that people aren't normally in. It just appealed to my curiosity. And I never even considered a single other job after that.
But do you still write poetry though? No?
No. I don't. I think one of the things that happens the longer that you're, edited by other people is you lose that love of your own voice. Like, I think there's a need for that when you do poetry. Sometimes I like to write these little rambles about my life on Facebook for my friends, but I really I don't feel that kind of attachment anymore to my own voice in the way that you do when you're in college and you're writing a really dark poem that's secretly about your ex-boyfriend.
I love it. Do you still have those poems that you can at least go back to?
I do. I do. In fact, apparently one year I gave them to my mother as a gift for Christmas because I thought obviously she's just going to want these. And recently, my mom's going to be 79 this year. She tried to give them back to me. She was like, "Oh, I thought you might want these." And I'm like, "I think this was a terrible gift in the first place.
But you know what? If those poems had never made it to your teacher, who knows where you would be today in your career, right? You
Right.
have, as a journalist, you've traveled all over the country, but you also have traveled all over the world. So talk about your time in China because you were a correspondent there for some time, correct? For the Wall Street Journal.
That's right. I mean, I can't tell you how random that probably is to a lot of people. I mean, I grew up in a small town, and I was working at the Wall Street Journal in New York City covering financial markets. And one of the jobs I had was covering emerging markets, which is like the rest of the world. And China is considered an emerging market in finance. And I sort of got to a place where I was like, I don't really want to talk about the rest of the world from New York City. I want to go there. I want to be in the rest of the world. So I started asking around, and there was an opening in Beijing, China. I had never been to China. I didn't speak Mandarin. Um, I raised my hand for the job and convinced the bosses of the Wall Street Journal that I should be a foreign correspondent in China. And so I moved there in the beginning of January 2019, sight unseen, and hit the ground. The way I describe it is it's kind of like when you put bread in the toaster and it becomes toast. Like you can't turn it back into bread. Going to China turned me into toast. It completely changed everything about my experience as a journalist. I also was there at a really interesting time. We were in the middle of a trade war, and COVID hit. So I experienced China in this completely different way, even than I had for the first part of my many months there.
Wow, who knew that you were going to be somewhere in the world, essentially, as history is unfolding? Tell me what it was like in 2019, 2020 to be there.
It's so true, and I had gone there to cover the consumer market. I was writing about, quirky stories about cream cheese being put in tea in China and, people getting into baseball and things like that. And then next thing you know, there's this mysterious virus in Wuhan, and we had colleagues who were there, and then they got trapped there. We were in the middle of the biggest news story that any of us probably remember. It was massive, and it was unfolding minute by minute. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember anything, honestly, from some of the days there. It was nonstop. It was a different place. Everyone was scared. They sent me some equipment from Hong Kong and said, just take like a ton of footage of yourself. Like I became the news story. It was like, how do you get around right now in China? People around the world want to understand, like how to protect themselves. And so there's this video, if you look deep in the internet, of me riding my bicycle around Beijing or going to the park and, using hand sanitizer and getting my temperature checked. And I still really value that video because it reminds me of my time there. It's like there I am in my neighborhood, and I'm with, the little old ladies who dance every night in the park and all the things that brought me so much joy, except through the eyes of, someone using hand sanitizer and standing 6 feet apart at the grocery store.
I mean, your time there as a journalist was so important. You're, helping bring these stories to people all over the world. But personally, how was it for you to be there?
It was really, really rewarding to learn that I could still learn so much, right? I mean, I had to learn Mandarin. I showed up in China, and all the signs, it was like I was blind. I didn't know what anything meant. The characters, I would look around, I could get lost in a city block because I couldn't tell a photography store from the grocery store, right? And so by the time I left China, I could get around in Mandarin. I could order a taxi. One time I got stuck in an elevator, and I was able to tell them I'm stuck in an elevator and here's the building that I'm in. I mean, you don't realize, obviously we take for granted being able to communicate, and every single time that I was understood there felt like a little miracle. And it was also a way for me to take in the culture. The language itself taught me so much, and being able to communicate with people about China and the history. And I just fell madly in love in a way that I really haven't before or since. It was incredible experience. And then really what happened was it turned me into a permanent foreign correspondent. right? I mean, when you're writing about the place that you're also living in and as you're experiencing it, it completely changes the way you are as a reporter. You're not making a bunch of phone calls and then going home to your regular life. This is your life, right?
Mhm.
When you're a foreign correspondent. And so when I got back to America, that's how I saw America. I saw America as the fascinating, bizarre, wild, diverse place that it is. And everything suddenly lit up in a way that it hadn't been.
I mean, I'm sure you saw so many things, experienced so many things while you were in China, and you can really only write about it, right? So much. And so, if there's something that you could tell people here in America about your experience there that you would want them to maybe know that maybe you didn't, you weren't able to say in your stories, what is that? What is the one thing that you would tell someone who maybe never been to China?
Okay, can I have 2 things?
Yeah, of course.
All right. One is that China is a big, wild, diverse place, right? It is not one place. It is many, many, many places in the same way that America is. There are different languages there. There are different cultures and different foods, and people who live in rural areas and people who live in cities, and just so many like subculture upon subculture upon subculture. The idea of trying to sum up China is ridiculous, and that would be probably the first thing that I would say to someone. The other thing that I would say I want people to understand is that we are not our governments. People are people, no matter where you go. And I think that one of the things that is unfortunate about the contraction of foreign correspondence around the globe is that we have to kind of boil so much down to whatever is happening, like at the political level between these government leaders. And we miss the kind of texture of a place and the people who are often have nothing to do with what's going on with the politics and have their own lives and their own things going on. And that's really the beauty of China and America and anywhere you go, right? And so I think those are the 2 things I would say about China.
How was it for you to be this foreign correspondent in China, right? But your audience is America, the people who live here.
It was in some ways, it was easy for me because I was new to China, and so I saw it the way an American would see it because I was an American. In other ways, it could be frustrating
Mm,
because anytime you had to talk about China, you had to translate it into something an American would understand. So it's like there are massive technology companies there that are, bigger than technology companies here, but we could only explain them in terms of a technology company someone would understand. So you'd be like, oh, like Alibaba's the Amazon of China, which is not true. It is much more complicated than that. Or WeChat, trying to explain WeChat to an American, which is an app that is everything. It's like Facebook combined with your contacts, combined with your, I don't know, all of your news and social media. Like it's like everything in one app, and your payment system was hard, But I guess what I've always found with every beat is that you have to actually change beats every few years because you stop remembering how to translate things. It becomes so second nature to you that
uh,
you forget that not everybody understands how utility companies work, for instance, something I've covered before, or not everybody realizes that, all of their cocoa beans come from West Africa. And so it's good. It's good for you and your brain to have to translate something different every few years, I think. That's my strong opinion.
so what do you think is next for you? What's next for you on the horizon?
Well, I actually have been interested in getting into podcasting. So we're gonna see if that's the direction my career takes. But
I feel like
I've
you're doing a great job.
I know I'm doing a great job right now. I just have found that there's been so many times where I've been on the ground and I've wanted to bring a voice or a
Mm,
place to people in a way that was much more difficult to convey with the written word. And I like the idea of having different kinds of storytelling in my arsenal beyond print, which is something that I have been doing, like I said, for 22 years. So let's see if there's other ways to tell stories. It's also just become such an important format. So many people, their podcasts are like the only time that they actually really are able to stop and pay attention and kind of disconnect, right? It's a huge medium, and I want to be a part of it.
Yeah, news is always evolving, right? How we disseminate that to audiences. So, you know, my next question for you is for those journalists who are trying to break into the business, navigating all of this, the changing of the platforms, the shrinking newsrooms, we have layoffs and even AI. What do you have as far as advice to those who are wanting to get into this business, whether it's broadcast or newspapers or podcasting, social media?
Yeah, it is funny when people ask me for advice because I say, well, the career path I took doesn't really exist anymore, right? I came up in a the tiny little local paper. I would say pivot, pivot, pivot. It's the same part of your brain that you use to be a journalist. You have to be curious, right? And I think where I see people fall down in this industry is when they stop being curious about the ways in which our industry is evolving and changing and get angry. It's easy to get angry, right? It's easy to say, well, they're making stupid decisions, or, why would we people are stupid, they're not reading anymore. Whatever it is you want to say, right? But the reality is, okay, AI, it's not going away. AI is a huge change, and I am embracing it. I mean, I have been taking classes in AI. I am learning how to use it. I think it has become, it is something that you can use ethically, that is going to make you a better journalist. You're going to understand it first and foremost, which is incredibly important because it is going to be a part of every single industry that we write about from now on. This is not a small change. This is it's like saying to someone, I'm not going to use the internet. I just think that is just, bad for society. You can't. You don't have that choice, really. I mean, unless you want to live outside of the world. And so I think that you need to stay curious about the ways that things are changing and just keep going as long as they let you. That's what I always said. I always said, I'm going to keep doing this because it's the most fun job in the world as long as they let me do it. And when they don't let me do it anymore, I'll do something else. But I have a feeling they're going to keep letting me do it.
I have a feeling too. Yeah, stay curious and really just be open to change, right? And evolve with technology and the times, I think, is probably the biggest lesson and message here. Why do you think, though, that, journalists are still so important? Some people say, well, I have AI and, we can just lean on that. Or I have social media. I can just open up, my phone and social media app and get my news that way. Why do you think traditional journalists are still so important today?
We more than ever need vetted information. We need humans who are ensuring that information is true, is fact checked, is coming from reliable sources. I think one of the ways in which we've fallen down as an industry is that we really haven't educated the public about what it is that we do. And so what we're seeing is this kind of problem now where trust in the media is very, very low. And in part, it's because we've spent so much time kind of doing journalism and not really helping people understand what journalism is. And so I think that that's an opportunity for us to listen and then try to make some changes in the industry around what it is that we're hearing.
And AI can't be that compassionate person, right? Interviewing someone to get that story to step into somebody's life, like you
Yeah.
talked about earlier.
And I think it's important. I mean, it's important to think about the things that AI will never be able to do. And so I've made the later part of my career on being on the ground, being at the scene, being in someone's living room, being in the moment when the chief executive is being, is murdered. Like I think that journalists underestimate the power of being there. And that is something that AI will never be able to do.
Well, Julie, I have a fun question for you now. Speaking of AI, like you said, we have to embrace AI, right? Newsbreak recently launched a new AI agent to help their readers and viewers curate their own personal feeds based on their interests. So I have to ask you, if you could curate your own personal news feed, what would your news feed look like?
I think my news feed would be all about the things I need for Steel Pioneer fire cooking
Interesting.
I married a chef who I met in Beijing, and we now live just outside Chattanooga, Tennessee, and started an outdoor fire cooking school. And
Wow.
so There is a lot of news now that we need to help our cooking school take off. And some of that has to do with the local agriculture, economy, understanding what's going on with farming, demographics, tourism, all the various events going on in the area. Like I would want everything to be about, food, tourism, and culture in this region so that I can feel like we are a part of the community.
Well, if you ever decide to have a tasting and, you have an extra seat, please let me know if you want to bring your podcast on the road. I will gladly be one of your guests.
Oh, come on down. I'm always telling people, like, it's so fun. We live in Appalachia. It's beautiful. There's hiking everywhere if you're into that kind of thing. If you're not into that kind of thing, we have tons of like fun tourism. We have great music and bluegrass. Just come. We'll feed you. It'll be fine. Just to let me know when you're coming through.
Eat, burn off the calories with a hike, enjoy the scenery. Sounds like my kind of day.
Yeah, you're in.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your career and about why it's important to have journalism and journalists like you. So thank you again, Julie.
Yes, this was fun. I was really glad to be a guest. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. And that is all the time we have for this episode of Newsbreak's Behind the Byline. Don't forget to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to Behind the Byline on your favorite platform, Newsbreak. Until then, I'm Maria Sid Medina, and we will see you soon.